Leo got the raise he'd been working toward for 2 years, not a small one. A real one. The kind that changes the number on your payslip in a way you actually notice. He remembers sitting in his manager's office, nodding calmly, and then walking to the car park and sitting in his car for a few minutes just to let it land. He'd done it. More money. Finally, 3 years later, Leo had almost nothing to show for it. Not because he wasted it. Not because something went wrong. Because by the time he looked up, his life had quietly become exactly as expensive as his new salary. And not a single pound of the raise had changed his financial position. He'd earned more. He'd kept the same amount. And he hadn't noticed it happening. Leo had been on the same salary for almost 3 years before the promotion came. During that time, he developed a very specific picture of what a higher income would mean. He'd pay off the credit card balance that had been sitting there since his mid-20s. He'd start building proper savings. He'd finally have room to breathe at the end of the month instead of watching the account thin out in the final week. The raise felt like the solution to a problem he'd been carrying for years. What Leo didn't account for was that the moment the problem changed size, so did the solution he reached for. Why it felt like success. The first month with the new salary felt genuinely different. The account balance after payday was higher than Leo had ever seen it. He paid the credit card off completely, transferred some money to savings. Felt, for a brief window, like a person who had their finances under control. Then the thinking started. Not reckless thinking. Reasonable thinking. He'd been driving the same car for 4 years. It was fine, but the new salary made a better one feel justified. He'd been in the same apartment for 3 years, slightly too small, slightly the wrong postcode. The raise made moving feel sensible rather than extravagant. He deserved it. He'd worked for it. Both of those things were true, and both of them were completely beside the point. The car came first. Leo didn't buy the most expensive option. He was careful about it. He researched. He found something practical but noticeably better than what he'd had, and the monthly finance payment felt manageable against the new salary. The apartment followed 6 months later. Again, not extreme. A better area. More space. A building with a gym he used twice before the novelty wore off. The rent increase was significant but not alarming when he ran the numbers against his income. Then, more gradually, everything else shifted. The supermarket he used. The restaurants he considered normal. The holidays he felt were appropriate for someone at his level now. The gym membership he'd added. The subscriptions that had accumulated without ceremony. None of it had been a single large decision. It had been dozens of small ones, each individually defensible, each quietly consuming the raise he'd been so certain would change things. By the end of the first year, Leo's bank account at the end of each month looked almost identical to how it had looked before the promotion. He was earning several £1,000s more per year and saving the same amount as before, which was very little. The trap nobody sees. The reason lifestyle inflation is so effective is that it doesn't feel like a mistake while it's happening. Every individual upgrade Leo made was reasonable. A better car after years in an aging one. An apartment that actually fitted his life. Food that didn't feel like a compromise. Experiences that matched where he felt he'd arrived. Each decision, examined alone, was entirely defensible. The problem only becomes visible when you step back and look at the pattern. Because what Leo had actually done, without planning it, without intending it, was build a life that required his new salary to function. Before the raise, he could manage on what he earned. After the raise, he needed the new amount just to sustain the life that had quietly assembled itself around it. He hadn't moved forward financially. He'd raised his floor, and a higher floor isn't the same thing as a higher ceiling. 2.5 years after the promotion, Leo sat down one evening and did something he'd been avoiding. He calculated his net worth, not his salary, not his monthly cash flow, his actual net worth, what he owned minus what he owed. He'd expected it to be low. He hadn't expected it to be almost exactly what it had been before the raise. 2 years of a significantly higher income, and his financial position had barely moved. He sat with that number for a long time. Then he went back through his bank statements for the past 12 months and added up what had changed: the car payment, the higher rent, the food, the subscriptions, the holidays. The raise had been absorbed completely by a lifestyle that had grown the moment there was room for it to grow. The person who changed his thinking. Leo mentioned this to an older colleague named Clifford a few weeks later. Clifford had been at the company for over 20 years. He'd had several promotions. His salary was, by any measure, comfortable. He also lived in the same house he'd bought in his early 30s, drove a car that was 8 years old, and had never been the kind of person who talked about restaurants or holidays. Leo had always assumed Clifford was simply conservative by nature. Then Clifford said something that reframed everything. He said, "Every raise I ever got, I asked myself one question before I spent any of it. Does this money change my future, or does it just change my present?" He said most people answer that question automatically, without realizing they're answering it. They get the raise. The lifestyle expands. The future stays exactly where it was. Leo understood, sitting across from Clifford, that he had been answering that question automatically for 2.5 years, and he had answered it the same way every time. The difference between Clifford and Leo wasn't income. It wasn't discipline in the way most people mean it, white-knuckling past things you want but can't afford. It was that Clifford had made a conscious decision about what raises were actually for. In his view, a raise had one primary purpose: to increase the distance between what he earned and what he needed to live. That distance, the gap between income and expenses, was the only number that actually measured financial progress. Leo had been collapsing that gap the moment it appeared. Every raise had widened it briefly, and then the lifestyle had moved to close it again. The gap never stayed open long enough to build anything. The shift: Leo didn't restructure his entire life. He didn't move to a cheaper apartment or sell the car. What he changed was how he treated the next pay increase when it came. When his salary moved up again the following year, he made one decision before anything else happened: a fixed amount. A meaningful percentage of the increase went to savings and investments before he'd adjusted to receiving it. Before the lifestyle had a chance to notice the additional room, before his sense of what was normal had time to expand into the new space, the rest he allowed himself to enjoy. The upgrade wasn't entirely off the table, but it was a smaller upgrade than the raise could have funded. And for the first time since his first promotion, the gap between his income and his expenses didn't immediately close itself. What Leo noticed over time. A year later, Leo observed something that had never happened before. His savings had grown consistently for 12 months. Not because he'd found a way to earn more. Not because he'd made dramatic cuts. Because he'd simply stopped letting the raise decide his lifestyle before he'd decided what the raise was for. He also noticed how quickly the lifestyle expansion he'd allowed felt entirely normal. The portion he'd chosen not to upgrade, he stopped missing it within weeks. The lifestyle adjusts to what's available. It always had. The difference was that this time, Leo had chosen what to make available before the adjustment happened. Leo still has the car, still lives in the apartment he moved into after the first promotion, but the financial position those choices sit on top of looks completely different from 2 years ago. Not because he earned more, because he stopped treating every raise as permission to rebuild his life around a higher price point. The dangerous thing about lifestyle inflation isn't that it happens to careless people. It happens to careful ones. People who research their decisions, who don't buy impulsively, who feel, in the moment of each upgrade, that they are being entirely reasonable, and they are. The mistake isn't in any single choice. It's in the pattern those choices form when they happen every time income rises. More money arrives. The lifestyle expands. The gap closes. Nothing changes. The biggest threat to Leo's financial future wasn't that he hadn't earned enough. It was that for years, every pound of progress quietly became a pound of lifestyle before it ever had the chance to become something else.